summer. Yeah, so it's wonderful to see those who show up in person. Were you, I remember some faces, but all of you were in the two previous sections? Not the last row, I not, okay. So this is our third presentation. We are good with people online, everything is good there? Okay. All right, let's get somebody else. Hi there. So these are three lectures about modern Jewish philosophers, right? We started with Buber. So Martin Buber was the first 2 weeks ago. Then we had last week Soloveitchik, Joseph Soloveitchik, and our focus today is Mordecai Kaplan. Just to be sure that we're all on the same page. Who does not know who Mordecai Kaplan was? Never heard of Mordecai Kaplan. Never heard of it. Okay. So I'll never heard. Okay. So you'll see, I'm going to give a lot of information. Unfortunately, our screen is too small in this particular room. We couldn't use the other room for whatever reason. And therefore, you basically will have to listen to me and kind of connect what I'm saying to what you see. But I recognize that it's hard to see on this small screen. So yeah, please come closer. You'll see much better if you come closer. So the presentation last week on Soloveitchik gave you a sense of how important this thinker really was, primarily for Orthodox Jewry, but not only for Orthodox Jewry. But one of the problems that we have, that people think, oh, I'm an Orthodox Jew, therefore I can listen to Soloveitchik. But if I'm a Reform Jew or conservative Jew or Reconstructionist Jew, then Soloveitchik is less important. And I hope that, or is less relevant to me or less appealing to me and so forth. The way I structure the three lectures suggests that all of them, Buber, Soloveitchik, Kaplan, are relevant to all of us, no matter where we are on the spectrum. So it doesn't matter how you define yourself. If you're conservative or Reform or humanistic Jew or none of the above or Orthodox, I think that all people, all Jews today need to know the thought of these people and more. So when I get to the end of it, you will see, I will give you a few more names to kind of tease your appetite a little bit and suggest something that we can do about Jewish philosophy. So let's start. Our focus today is this man, Mordecai Kaplan. And since most people know something about Mordecai Kaplan, I think, as I said at the end of last presentation last week, it's wonderful that we are here at the Jewish Community Center talking about Mordecai Kaplan, since the idea for a Jewish Community Center that has people who do what we're doing right now, that was Kaplan's idea, right? So Kaplan's idea actually was to have one place which functions as a shul with a pool with a school. Yeah, that was the idea. So a synagogue that has also all the facilities, all the sports facilities, but also the school. Now, we are very close to his vision, but it's not identical, right? What's missing in this building? There's no shul, there's no synagogue here. So a lot of people took issues with Kaplan and thought it's a bad idea to combine the shul and the pool, right? The synagogue and the pool, and the synagogue and sports, because they thought you are secularizing Jewish life. So there was an opposition to him. Actually, I'll tell you a lot about it, but I would say that you cannot understand the history of American Judaism and American Jewry in the 20th century without this guy, without Kaplan, okay? It's simply impossible. He shaped practically everything that we take for granted today. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. He's I'll tell you a lot about it, and we'll try to follow the slides. So we're talking here about a person who is a rabbi, who is an educator. He was a public intellectual. The person, this is at the height of his fame and power. We are dealing with a person who wanted to solve a problem of how to be Jewish in America. I'll show you quite a lot of many slides that will illustrate it. But basically, the issue is how can Jews who came to America, especially after 1880, from Eastern Europe, they're all traditional Jews. They all want to be religious, but they are living in a new environment. And in this new environment, it's very hard to be both religious and American at the same time. So the real issue for Kaplan is, how do I Americanize Jews? Do you need to make a change, Ari? No? Okay. So how do I Americanize Jews, and how, including himself, of course. So he's a master teacher. He was incredibly influential. You'll see all the institutions, or some of the institutions that he created. His goal is to reconstruct Judaism. To reconstruct Judaism means to reinterpret Judaism, to look at Judaism not just as a religion, not just as a body of dogmas, if you wish, or beliefs, or even things that you must do, but rather as a holistic way of life. So that's the goal. The goal is to create a way to be Jewish in America, which is democratic, which is pluralistic, which is secularizing how to be Jewish in that environment. So that's what he's trying to do. And he did it for his entire life. Now, my question is, or the question to us is, how philosophically was he? Was he a philosopher? And if so, what kind of a philosopher? So I will say a few words about pragmatism. The people who influenced him were the pragmatist philosophers. William James, John Dewey, those names are familiar. These are the people who influenced him. Ralph Emerson also. And what he's doing, he's taking ideas from a lot of people who are not born Jews, come in, and appropriating it to the Judaism that he wants to reinterpret, reconstruct, put together in a new way. Now, he's a highly rationalist person. And I have a book here, which is one of 3 volumes of his journals. He wrote journals throughout his life. And amazingly, it's available now in print. And some of his comments are unbelievably, shall we say, shrewd, or they just go through. I can read to you at the end, if we get to it, one comment that you said on Buber, and it's unbelievably not compassionate comment. Okay, so this guy really he saw truth, and he's kind of, how do I see what things really are? Not what I want them to be, but they really are. And he's going to retell the story of Judaism in a way that takes out this concept of supernaturalism. So what he wants Judaism to be is naturalist. I don't want miracles. I don't want the belief in chosenness. I don't want any kind of reference to a transcendent God. I'm going to tell you what God is, and you'll see in a minute how he interpreted God. But the point is that he's very much a rationalist. And in that regard, he's closer to Soloveitchik than to Buber. Okay? But Soloveitchik was an Orthodox Jew. Kaplan started as an Orthodox Jew. He grew up Orthodox, but over the years, he's going to change, and he's going to hold views that are going to be considered heretical. So in case you don't know, Kaplan was excommunicated. There was a cherem, an ban of excommunication against Kaplan, after he wrote his famous Haggadah, 1941. By 1945, the cherem was declared against him. What it means and whether it means anything, we'll get to it. But just that you'll see, this person has guts. He was very courageous. He was very persistent in his approach. He wouldn't take no for an answer. Actually, I think that probably to do business with him was pretty hard. But I read his diaries. He was on some not so good terms with a lot of the people that he worked with, and I think it's because of his commitment to truth in a very kind of harsh way sometimes. So if you want ways to describe him, he started as a modern Orthodox rabbi. He was ordained by an East European rabbi, Rabbi Ines, who was a Zionist also. But He's also a philosopher, he's a theologian, he's a homilist or preacher. His control of the language, I'm talking now about the English language, was incredibly good. I'm not talking just facility with the language, but his mind, his crisp mind enables him to kind of get to the heart of the matter and to do it all in English. Now, he's the first Orthodox rabbi speaking English in America because he came here as a child and he picked up the English like a child would. So the fact that he could speak English without an accent was a big deal. He's a spiritual leader. He's very much of an innovator. Some people would consider him a radical innovator. Give you one example. He actually thought and tried to take out the Kol Nidre prayer from Yom Kippur. If you tell yourself, can I go to the synagogue today and not hear Kol Nidre? A lot of people go to the synagogue on Yom Kippur because of Kol Nidre. But he thought, no, I'm going to substitute it with Psalm 130. So he really had he had a lot of courage to do things which were quite amazing. So he's an institution builder. He does a lot of, he really created the institutions that we take for granted. His goal is to modernize Judaism. He's also the first person to be educated as a rabbi. He got his degree at Columbia, only an MA, not a PhD, which turns out to be a problem later on, but in sociologist. And he's you can call him a first sociologist. I don't know if it's a good term or not, but because he's not an academic, but he really thinks that sociology is relevant to how we think about Judaism. So maybe you have wondered, because I did, what is this M in Mordecai M. Kaplan? Turns out that it's all of those names in a sense. The M, so he was born in a Yiddish-speaking family, and Motel was his name. But this Motel became Mordecai, okay? And in between, there is Maurice. Why Maurice? Because he was in France for about a year and a half or so before coming to America. He went to school in France, so he had to be like a French kid. I'm not sure when did he get the Max and the Mark. I think that Max was given first, and maybe became too much of a European sounding name, so it becomes Mark when he's in America. I'm not sure entirely. I didn't see any information to exactly when those names were changed, but we all know him in his Hebrew name, Mordecai, and that tells you that his orientation is very much a Zionist orientation. So it's a very interesting character, has all of the above. Now let's locate him in Jewish history or in American Jewish history. So you probably, this is not a course about the history of American Jewry, but we clearly have a very interesting story to tell. The most relevant period here for us is in the middle. After the Russian Jewish migration, we're talking about over 2.5 million Jews coming from 1880 to 1924. That's the Jewry that he's trying to change, or he's trying to transform, he's trying to help them become Americanized. And he's doing it throughout his life. And he lived 102 years, right? So he really was long living. And in the job that he held until 1963. Then he lived 20 more years after he stepped down from his position at JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary. So this is what you need to think about, the middle part of the story. If you don't know anything about American history, I really urge you to get any of those books. You'll get the slideshow so you can choose. But if you want a very good book, a very solid, detailed, very academic, is the book of Hasia Diner, The Second from the Right, The Jews of the United States. That's a big book, excellent history. She's a wonderful historian. If you want a shorter version of it, kind of more easier to read, the next book that she wrote, A New Promised Land, that's a very, also, it's a small book, but very accessible, very good. Another person that you need to know about if you think about American Jewry is the person on the bottom left, Jonathan Sarna from Brandeis University. So American Judaism is a must read for anybody who wants to know about how to think about American Judaism. We think we know it because we live it, but unless you study it, you don't really know it. So here's the picture to keep in mind, some pictures to kind of get into your visual framework. This is, of course, the Lower East Side. Everybody has been to the Lower East Side, right? You know what those places look like. We still have a museum that shows what people are, but these are difficult conditions. We're dealing with poor people, right? The Jews who arrived were basically poor. They are observant Jews. They have to struggle for survival. So this is not easy. It's not the kind of lifestyle of upper middle class Americans that people experience today. That's not the story at the beginning of the 20th century. Absolutely not. It's a different story. And he is addressing that population that is going to become Americanized, but it's going to take several decades. So probably anybody here who is not from a Russian descent or East European descent, let's see. I don't think, okay. Ari is from India. But in the audience, other than that, everybody probably comes with parents from Eastern Europe, right? Very few people you would find that whose parents came from Germany or from other German-speaking country. That's an earlier, of course, an earlier wave of migration. So imagine the challenge. The challenge that he has is this. How do you remain Jewish in open society? We still have that problem with us, right? And it's going to get worse in many ways. But during the 20th century, remember, Jews came here because they thought this is going to be the best place on earth. This was the promised land, or as they call it, the new promised land, the Golden Medina, right? The place that all the good things are going to happen to you. But the good things always come with bad things, right? Because we have the processes of acculturation, assimilation, secularization. All of those things are exactly what Jews in the beginning part of the 20th century struggled with, and we still struggle with. Obviously, it's different today, but the problems don't go away. So he's very concerned about survival of the Jewish people. He's very concerned about what does it mean to create a collective identity for the Jews in America? How do we do that? And how do we position ourselves in a pluralistic society? What are we? What does it mean to be an American Jew? What does it mean to be a Jewish American or an American Jew? Is it going to be hyphenated identity? What is it going to be? He has to think through all of those issues. And even the issues of egalitarianism and inclusion, namely the role of women, even that begins with Kaplan. How do we know that? Because Kaplan created the bat mitzvah ceremony. His daughter, Judith, was the first person to be bat mitzvah in 1922. And why was he so concerned about the bat mitzvah? Because he had 4 daughters. So he had to figure out, what am I doing about my daughters? It's not just enough that we talk about it. I have to come up with some structures. So the issues that really concern this man, who was, as I will tell you, kind of sociologically oriented, he thought in sociological terms, is how to be Jewish in an open democratic society, how to forge collective identity. What do those immigrants need? And how do I address those needs? How do I Americanize them? And his big insight, and it's consistent insight throughout his life, was I'm going to reinterpret Judaism for these people. It means also that he himself is going to struggle with all the issues, the theoretical issues. What does it mean Jewish? That's more practical. But theoretically, what is Judaism? What does it mean to believe in God? What is chosenness? And his writing is so crisp. So I will refer to some books that I'll show you a slide with the books. But if you're going to choose one book by Kaplan, choose this one, Dynamic Judaism. It's selections from his many speeches and many books, and it's very well organized, wonderfully edited, and you'll get a taste of his mind. His mind is clear, direct, analytical, no nonsense, and he doesn't like to gloss over problems. He admits problems, and that's why it's wonderful to read him. He reads very, very easily. So there's a lot of material here. Obviously, you don't need to worry too much about the dates, but I need to have it in one place, A, so I can remember it, but B, so you'll have a story, kind of an arc of a life. So we're dealing here with a person who was born into a traditional Jewish family. His father was a rabbi, Rabbi Israel Kaplan. Rabbi Israel Kaplan, very unique human being, an adherent of the Musar movement of Israel Salanter. He was brought into America to be part of the entourage of the chief rabbi of New York. And basically, this person is going to suffer quite a lot. His father suffered. He was demoted at some point, and Kaplan always had very complex and bitter feelings about what was done to his father, because just a shochet as opposed to a rabbi, it wasn't a nice story. But the point is that this individual, his father, opened up Judaism for him from a very young age. So as a youngster, of course, he was sent to a yeshiva, but he also studied philosophy. He was introduced to philosophy, to medieval philosophy, and also to biblical criticism when he was still, I would say, a pubescent child or an adolescent. And the interesting thing here is that in 1895, he goes to City College. And in City College, he's going to study like every other person, right? So here is the issue. The issue is that this traditional Jew opens himself up because of his father to secular learning. So he's going to remain. The question is, how do I remain orthodox and open to secular learning? And I'm going to go to school in a non-religious institution, that's City College. And as you know, many Jews in New York went to City College. So the public school system really made American Jews what they are. Without the public school system, we will have a very different story. So after City College, he's going to get his rabbinic degree from a new institution, the Jewish Theological Seminary. The Jewish Theological Seminary is associated with conservative Judaism, right? But not at that time yet. At this time, it's still kind of a modern Orthodox institution. He goes there. The institution is going to become affiliated or more rigidly defined only after Solomon Schechter took over the management, the leadership of the school. But by the time that he's there, it's an attempt to create a more modernizing Orthodox Jewry. He's going to get his rabbinic degree. He's going to serve in Keilat Yeshurun, a modernizing Orthodox synagogue, primarily for East European migrants. And after Schechter becomes the head of the school, the Jewish Theological Seminary, he's going to bring him over and he's going to lead the teaching institute of the Jewish Theological Seminary. So he was the director of that institute until 1940. Then that came to an end, and he remained in the institution as a professor of homiletics until 1963. But this person is always building, always creating. So 1912, he created the Young Israel movement of modern Orthodox Judaism. So he's always trying to figure out, how do I modernize Judaism? What do I need to do? And all of those institutions that he was involved, I'll show you pictures in a second, he would get into some hot water with people. It wasn't easy. People always debated with him. Sometimes he joined a group that already existed before him, and he was taken in as the rabbi. But you probably all know 1921, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, that was famous for, and that would become, that would lead later on, 1968, basically to the creation of the Reconstructionist movement and the seminary of the Reconstructionist movement. And the person who did that work was his son-in-law, Ira Eisenstein. So clearly, he created basically a lot of what we take to be modern Judaism in America. So here are some of his books. I brought some of them with me. The most famous book, and that I didn't bring with me because it's very big, Judaism as Civilization. Who read the book, Judaism as Civilization? No, it's a big book, now available in new editions. it takes some doing to go through, but it's really worth doing. But all the books that I have here on the list are really wonderful books. Perhaps if you're interested in ideas, the book, two of them you can see that these are old, these are the original publications. So the Judaism Without Supernaturalism, if you're interested in philosophy, that's the book to read. If you're interested more in sociology and history, so The Purpose and Meaning of Jewish Existence. So these two books are absolutely wonderful books. And I have some citations from them later on, you'll see. But basically, the guy wrote a lot. Mordecai Kaplan was a very productive author, lots and lots of essays, primarily published in the Menorah Journal. He was prolific, and his sermons. He was a marvelous sermonizer, and he really knew how to be an effective speaker. So here are some of his books. This is the book on the left, The Judaism as Civilization. That's what the original publication looks like. The modern publications look somewhat differently. There's one with introduction by Mel Scott. I'll show you in a minute a picture of him. Another one with Arnie Eisen, who used to be the chancellor of the conservative movement. But these are some of his books. Each one is worth reading. This is Mel Scott. As we saw in the case of Buber, you always need a student who will really do the work for you, in a sense, who will write about you, who will explicate your ideas. Mel Scott did to Kaplan what was done to Buber by his student. So it's the same kind of dynamics. Here are some of his books. I have this one I have here. That's a wonderful biography that Mel Scott, by the way, the brother of Mel Scott lives here in Phoenix, so in case you don't know. But Mel Scott is a terrific scholar who taught for many years at Brooklyn College. So here is the question that he's trying to solve. How do I create an institution that I can get what I need to get all under one roof? Not that people will go to synagogue in one place, to exercise in a second place, to swim in a third place, and so forth. So how do I create? That was his question. And look at the middle one, if you can see the middle one. So he basically aspired to create a new institution that will constitute the modern Jewish community. So that's why he thinks like a sociologist. How can I create an institution for everybody in the Jewish community to go to the same place and to live in the most integrated and integrative way? And he founded the Jewish Center, that's on 86th Street, and a few years later, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. So these are the two, on the same slide, you have on the left, the Jewish Center, and on the right, the society. They're very close by. If you go to New York, you can identify those buildings. But clearly, that's the attempt to create the institutions of American Jewry. And that's all happening in the 1915, then 1921. So you're in the beginning of the century. Out of Kaplan's ideology, out of his commitments, out of his organization came Reconstructionist Judaism. So Reconstructionist Judaism has a very different feel from Orthodox Jewry that we talked about last time, or even from Reform Judaism. It's not the same. The feel is different, the look is different, the commitments are different. So basically, this is the most, this is conservative Judaism and Reconstructionist Judaism are all American products. They're not like a German product that was brought here, which is the case of Reform. They are not like East European Jewry that was brought here. That's the case of Orthodoxy. This is really America. It's all about becoming an American Jew. So look at the middle line. What is it all about? It's about history. It's about making sure that you use your intellect, you use your rationalist thought. You don't just spout ideas because you were taught those ideas. You have to think everything. You have to engage it intellectually. It's about being pluralistic. It's about being inclusive, egalitarian. So Kaplan has basically a vision that all those wonderful ideas, pluralism, justice, peace, equality. These are all ideas that Judaism expresses best, better than anything else. And he believes, as you'll see in a minute when we get to some quotes, that he thinks that this is the best thing for humanity. Humanity needs Jews, and humanity needs Judaism to have all those ideas. Reconstructionist Judaism, if you don't know some of those the famous quotes, the past has a vote, but not a veto. Past has a vote, but not a veto. In other words, I need to know about the past, I need to be connected to the past, but I cannot let the past determine what my present will be. I have to make that decision for myself in the present. Okay, so he's an independent thinker. He is he challenges everybody around him to be thoughtful, deep, inquiring. In other words, becoming philosophers. That's what he wants us all to be. If you look at the bottom line, he really is concerned with an idea that was very popular in the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, the notion of self-realization. Okay, that's a psychological concept. It was very important in Zionism. It's very important to a lot of psychologists in America. Give me a name of an American Jewish psychologist who talked about self-realization. Anybody can guess who it was? Yes? Very good. Abraham Maslow. So Maslow influenced Kaplan deeply. And basically the idea is that we're searching for happiness in a sense of flourishing. It's not in a sense of having fun. It's not about having fun. It's about being the most we can be, the best we can be. And he talks a lot about that. If you read his sermons, his writings, it's a very important idea. So he's very open to contemporary science, the social sciences especially. If you ask yourself who else is like the Reconstructionist Judaism, in case it's not clear, I give you all the other variants. Obviously, on this slide, you don't see any reference to Orthodox Jewry or to ultra-Orthodox Jewry or to Hasidism, but these are the main forms of American progressive, or if you want to call them liberal Judaism. Okay, so these are all more or less, I think, on the same page. In terms of his radicalism, 1941 is when as I told you already, he created a new Haggadah. So the idea that you can have a new Haggadah was very, very radical. Almost, I would say, to say that it's innovative, it's an understatement. People didn't think that you can innovate the Haggadah. But if you look at this at the top picture of all of those Haggadot today, you will see that today we take it for granted. Today, a lot of people have their own Haggadah. Actually, if you're not familiar with the Haggadah on the right, this is a new Haggadah, just came out in 2020 by a woman who is no longer with us. That's Ellen Bernstein, Rabbi Ellen Bernstein, who is an environmentalist. This is a wonderful environmentalist Seder. If you're interested in environmentalism, take a look at her Haggadah. There are many Haggadot today, feminist Haggadot that are concerned with all sorts of values, not just the text itself. So he's doing this in 1941 already, when he creates a new Haggadah, takes out what he doesn't like in the traditional Haggadah, and that's reference, for example, to the plagues. He takes out what he doesn't like. He interprets what he wants to interpret, namely focus on freedom, on progress, on justice. And basically, he's updating the Haggadah. Well, that was considered a big affront. And oops, let's see if I have it here. Don't I have it here? This says, oh, no, I don't have it here. So he was basically excommunicated. I thought I had that slide. I don't know why I don't see it. But he was excommunicated. And the question that we need to bring to our mind is, what does excommunication mean in democratic society? What does it mean? There's no way to enforce it. It has no legal power, unlike what it was in the early modern period or pre-modern period in general. Not anymore. So the fact that somebody says, I don't like your views and I don't want you to worship with me, that doesn't mean anything if you have an open society. You see the issue? So the cherem became a lot less impactful. Who is he influenced by? So here are some of the names that the people, the thinkers that influence him most, and probably Spinoza. Everybody knows that name, Spinoza, the great and very innovative and maybe heretical, if you wish. Spinoza was a child of Jewish conversos, people who were forced to be, whose parents were converted to Christianity, but over time they came back to Judaism. So Spinoza was born into that kind of family, and Spinoza is one of the most original, daring, challenging Jewish thinker probably that's ever lived. So we'll come to him. Emil Durkheim, I don't know if you know that, but that's the father of sociology. We have two sociologists, or at least one in the room here. So Durkheim influenced Kaplan greatly. Emerson, who talked a lot about pantheism, kind of the nature mysticism, or naturalism in general. William James, who introduced the concept of psychology of religious experience. John Dewey. These are people who influenced him. And the last one, Felix Adler, is the founder of the Society for Ethical Judaism. And he was his teacher at Columbia University. So I'll show you in a minute. So here again, some of those people, you can recognize some of the other names on the slide. If you don't know who Whitehead was a process philosopher, mathematician, and a process philosopher. A lot of the ideas that Kaplan had were taken from other philosophers in the early 20th century, and he adapted them and showed why Judaism experienced or exemplifies those ideas best. You can see that Buber influenced him also. Heschel, he was in conversation with Heschel. They were colleagues in the Jewish Theological Seminary. They are not saying the same thing. They're quite different, but he was very aware of Heschel's work and, of course, related to it. So here is Spinoza on the left. And Spinoza basically told us that God is not a person. You cannot pray to God. God is all there is. It's the totality, in a sense, it's the totality of what is. That's what God is. So it's hard to pray for. It's hard to ask God, you know what, I have an exam tomorrow, please help me, or whatever. That's how, when you talk to students, that usually rings a bell, right? Because they, they do think in those terms. But what he's saying is, look at the middle of the line 4, where he says, Spinoza identified salvation with the fulfillment of that which constituted human nature, which for him consisted in a life of the body and the emotions in the service and under control of reason. Should be reason in singular, not plural. My mistake. So basically, he takes from Spinoza, he agrees with Spinoza about naturalism. And he's going to reinterpret Judaism very much in alignment with this vision. That's very different from what we talked about last week about Soloveitchik, right? Because Soloveitchik had a very personal relationship with God. It's all about interaction, personal interaction in a very existential and emotionally laden way. Not here anymore. This is what I was looking for before. Sorry that it wasn't in the right order. So here's the Haggadah, his Haggadah, and there's some information about the excommunication. But as I told you, it's not very impactful because we are living in an open society. Yes.
Who excommunicated?
Agudat HaRabbanim, the Agudas HaRabbonim of United States and Canada. And they got together in a hotel in New York, and they issued basically it's a form of denunciation and rebuke. So it doesn't have a legal power. In Spinoza's case, when he was excommunicated, nobody could do business with Spinoza. Nobody could talk to him. Nobody could dine with him. And it could be effective because the Jewish community lived differently in the middle of the 17th century. But in the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century, any Jew can live anywhere, do whatever any Jew wants to do. So the fact that somebody doesn't like what you believe, or even what you do, didn't really have an impact. But it was it's a symbolic act that really said, we don't like this approach to Judaism. And he clearly had this kind of rebuke. So this is basically got a lot of attention. Non-Jewish thinkers, public intellectuals were, of course, behind Kaplan, but it tells you that there was different displeasure with him, including, by the way, members of the faculty of Jewish Theological Seminary. They did not share his innovation, most of them. Yes.
It says the burning concluded the formal they actually burned his books.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So this is really kind of a nasty piece of work, or nasty piece. It's a very sad thing, because we are living democratic environment. We believe that everything is open. But let me move on, because I see I'm looking at the clock and I see that time is going to run out of my lecture very soon. So I want to introduce you to another aspect, and if we have time, we'll do some more questions later. So this is the person. This is a Hada'am. Hada'am is a pseudonym of Asher Hirsch Ginsburg. He was a Zionist, a cultural Zionist. Basically, the reason it's important to talk about a Hada'am, about this particular Zionist ideologue, is that Hada'am said what matters is the notion of peoplehood. Jews are people, but they don't need a state. Hada'am was a Zionist who did not focus on statehood. He focused on culture, on collective identity, on relating to other Jews through knowledge of texts. He was a marvelous, very interesting thinker. Unfortunately, many American Jews today don't really read the Hada'am. When I grew up in Israel, we actually studied the Hada'am in high school. So for us, it was very, very important. But basically, he looks at Judaism as a culture, and that's where Kaplan is going to agree. That's Kaplan's approach. So here's Kaplan on a donkey in Palestine, 1938. He goes to Palestine. And actually, during that year, Kaplan met Buber, because Buber came to Palestine, 1938, if you remember our lecture from 2 weeks ago. And Kaplan was actually quite critical of Buber. He thought that Buber was actually a difficult man. He didn't like Buber. I don't know if I have it on the slide. We'll see if I get to it. But what he says is actually scathing criticism. So what's the point here? The point here is that Zionism is an idea. It's not about statehood. It's about humanization of all Jews, and actually of all human beings. So there's a message, a universal message, which is a ethical message, and that ethical message has to be communicated for all people. So like Buber, he was for binational states, for Jews and for Arabs, under the same rubric. He tried to make an aliyah late in his life, toward the end of his life, to Israel. It didn't work out. He was too ill and had to go back to the United States. But these are his idea that some people refer to as diaspora Zionism. So if you consider yourself Zionist today, you're still, neither you nor I, we are not in Israel, even though I grew up there, but we are not there, we are here. So we are part of the diaspora, but we have a commitment to something called Zionism. So look at how he defines that commitment, how he explains it. For us Jews, there can be no higher purpose than that of exemplifying the art of so living individually and collectively as to contribute to the intellectual, moral, and spiritual progress of mankind. So to be Jewish is to think in terms of progress, but not just your own progress or your group progress, humanity's progress, mankind's progress. That's a big philosophical idea. The type of religion that we do as a people, very much like Hada'am, as a people, and which mankind as a whole urgently needs as a means to survival, has to consist or take the form of moral responsibility in action. So that's the bottom line. If you want to be a good Jew, that's what you need to be, morally responsible in your actions. And he's going to suggests to us that all this is part of the religious nature of Judaism. If you go to the second quote, in the second quote, he's going to say, who are the Jews? The Jews are, look at the middle of the paragraph, they are the people in the image of God. So it's not just each individual has to imitate the divine. We as a people, the Jews as a collective, are the people of God. By the way, that phrase, Jews as a people in the image of God, that he didn't create it. It was created by A.D. Gordon, Aaron David Gordon, and a Zionist ideologue and spiritual leader at the beginning of the 20th century, died in 1922. So there's an interesting that. But think about it. If you ask yourself, why am I a Jew? He's giving us an answer. Now, here are some of the philosophers. I won't get into the details, too detailed maybe for what you need, but the point is that he's learning from the thinkers that he was introduced to in philosophy courses at Columbia University. And as a person who reads, he read very broadly and voraciously. The middle one, the middle line here, number 5, is the most important because basically Kaplan is going to take this idea that salvation, what does it mean by salvation or redemption? It means self-fulfillment in the world. So I need to fulfill myself. I need to express all my capacity, my intellectual, emotional, aesthetic, and so forth, in order to be a full human being. So that idea comes from Emerson, and he's going to appropriate that idea, and that's how he's going to interpret Judaism. Here is another teacher of his from Columbia University. Felix Adler taught at Columbia University. Felix Adler was the son of a rabbi, but Felix Adler eventually left Judaism and studied in Germany, became a PhD, came back to the United States, taught at Columbia University, taught ethics, was his teacher, was Kaplan's teacher. But eventually he left Judaism, converted, but I don't know what kind of conversion you can really talk about it, but basically he doesn't consider himself as a Jew because he considers himself as a person who speaks to humanity as a whole. So the Society for Ethical Cultures, I have good friends who grew up in that institution. And you can, of course, see it in New York when you go back to New York next time. Go see it, still exists, that building. So look at what it's about. It's about a very abstract, highly ethical approach to religion. So it's all about transcendence, but not transcendence to get to the Olam Haba, to the world after death, but rather self-transcendence. It's what do I need to do in order to be the best person I can be? And to do that, I have to care for others. I have to be involved with others. I have to really help other people. And in his mind, when I think about others and others that need to have me involved in their life, that's when God is involved. So when I'm a good person, God is as he would say, following Adler, God is this force that makes for salvation. That's the idea. That's a very interesting thing, but I want to move a little bit faster. This is pragmatism. So pragmatism is the predominantly American philosophical school, philosophical approach. That's William James, a very known person who really started the whole notion of the whole discipline of psychology of religion and psychology in general. So it's all about action. To be a pragmatist is to think, what do I need to do? What are my values and how do I translate into action? It's not about dogmas. It's not about just abstract beliefs. It's not about the God idea. It's about how God enables me to function properly toward other people. So the focus is on ethics. So basically, you can look at Kaplan as a pragmatist thinker, and he positions himself against Reform Judaism on the one hand, and even conservative Judaism, even though he comes out of it. And he wants to talk about what's the function? How does Judaism function in our life? And what does that function, how does it enable us to live individually and collectively? So there's a sociological bent in his mind because he studied sociology at Columbia. Now, he came up with this idea of the sancta of Judaism. The sancta of Judaism is just the components of the Jewish civilization. These are the components. Anything that you are not familiar with? No, everybody has all of those stuff, all of the stuff that you see on the slide. We take it for granted. We have sacred texts. We have commitment to the land of Israel. We have some knowledge of the Hebrew language, we have rituals, we have customs, we have the Sabbath and festivals, we have it all. And in a sense, Kaplan said to us, look how rich Judaism is. It's not just about what you do in the synagogue, it's everything else. It's a comprehensive way of life. So powerful, isn't it? So here's another person that's Dewey is relevant to us because of his rationalism and his kind of his commitment. I don't know why this slide is not exactly what I thought the order that I thought it would be. I think it's whatever. And where we are now in his theology. This is his famous book that I had with me here. Basically told us, don't think about God as a person. Think about God as a force. As a force that enables you to express yourself. So God is a process. It's a process of us behaving better. It's almost like God works through us. It's not that there's God over there and we are here and we somehow have to have some kind of communication. So it's not. It's God very much along the lines of Spinoza's thought. God works through us. What we do can either be godlike or godly, or the other way around, or not at all godly. Kaplan had a complex relationship with halacha. So in that sense, it's very different from Soloveitchik. So even though he's rationalist like Soloveitchik, he is not where Soloveitchik is on halachic matters. He is for innovation, he's for change, he's for reinterpretation. So the big difference between Kaplan and Soloveitchik, as much as between Soloveitchik and Buber, is Jewish law. And Kaplan was really, really innovative in that regard, and not everybody accepted. This is his famous book, Judaism as a Civilization. That's the most recent edition with an introduction by Arnold Eisen, who used to be the chancellor of the conservative movement of JTS and the leader of the conservative movement, but there are earlier vision. Kaplan tried to write poetry. This is an example of his poetry. I don't think that he was a good poet. He's too rationalist. But if I just read you one or two stanzas, you can see that the guy thinks like a philosopher, not like a poet. God is in the mystery of life, enkindling inert matter, and with inner drive and purpose. He is a creative flame that transfigures lifeless substance, leaping into ever higher realms of being, brightening into the radical glow of feeling till it turned into white fire of thought. Clearly, this is more philosophy in somewhat poetic form, but it's not really good poetry, but he did try. So Kaplan had a lot to say about revelation. But again, what he wants us to do is to move away from thinking in terms of miracles, in terms of mythic categories. Get rid of the myth, reinterpret the myth radically, and then you can be a modern Jew. So it's all about modernization. So here are that's a quotation from one of the books that I have here with me. So you can see the radical power of his thought. Everything has to fit science. He thinks scientifically, he thinks as a modern Jew, and he's willing to go all the way. The biggest radical idea of Kaplan is, let's get rid of chosenness. If God is the father of all humanity, then God has many chosen sons and daughters, not just the Jews. So the fact that he was willing to give up on chosenness, on the uniqueness of the Jewish people, tells you how radical this man really was. And what he's asking us to do is to engage in developing our character. So it's about ethics, about self-transcendence, but not so much about the uniqueness of Judaism or the Jews. On his salvation, he has a lot to say on salvation, has some wonderful sermons that he gave on the topic, and his books are filled with references to what does it mean to be active. It's almost like you're active on behalf of God. You are behaving properly in a godly way, a godlike way. And in doing so, you, of course, make the world a better place. His commitment is always to the collective, to peoplehood, and he wants us to, all of us, to be ethical people. Ethical people as a collective. And if we do it as a collective, that's the message, that's the mission of the Jews to humanity. Okay, so that's how he thinks. Here are some other quotes about his understanding of all of us as kind of ethical or spiritual people. And you can see that that's the vision behind the idea of he always pushed to create the University of Judaism. The idea was his. How do we need to educate our children in a new way, modern way, scientifically oriented way, so we can become modern Jews? If you ask me who is the most liked in terms of the history of Jewish philosophy, I would say Maimonides. He really thought that what he was doing is similar to what Maimonides was doing for the Jews in the Middle Ages. Look at the last line, the bolded words. God is to be found in the urge to truth, honesty, empathy, loyalty, justice, freedom, and peace. Who can disagree with that, right? That's a wonderful line. That comes from one of his speeches of the University of Judaism, A Compelling Need. So he thinks in terms of religion. So Judaism is a religious civilization, and everything else that we saw on a previous slide, the laws, the morals, the customs, the folkways, this is all aspects of what he calls the sancta of the Jewish tradition. Here are some names of people you probably know. If you're a conservative Jew, you probably recognize some of the people on that list. The one in the middle, Ira Eisenstein, was his son-in-law, and he created the Reconstruction, the institution of the movement were created by Ira Eisenstein, but all the others are very famous people and wonderful thinkers. And actually, I'm telling you, I think that people, it's a shame in a sense, or it's a loss, that we don't avail ourselves to the great learning and thinking that came from the pen of these people. So if you haven't read Robert Gordis or Milton Steinberg, maybe some people remember Milton Steinberg, early books from the 1950s, really terrific thinker. So in terms of American democracy, basically you get the point why he thought that that Judaism can fit in America. Here is a place that is close to close to this place, right? This is us here. This is the old building here in Phoenix, the Phoenix Jewish community. And basically, here's the idea that we need to have the pool together in the Jewish Community Center, but he wanted the synagogue to be in this building as well. And that, of course, didn't happen. And now we can end with some questions, unless you have other questions. So the big issue is to think, was he a secular Jew? What would you say? Was he a secular Jew? I would say no. He's a religious Jew, very much a religious Jew, but he wants to adapt Judaism to 20th century reality in which people live in a secularized environment. How do we go about it? It's open how you want to interpret him, where you find him intriguing and inviting and exciting intellectually, or whether you think that he really did a terrible thing to the Jewish community because he secularized Judaism. So how you interpret Kaplan depends on where you stand in the spectrum of American Judaism. He clearly was a rationalist, a functionalist, a thinker that always thought, okay, what is it going to do? He thinks in utilitarian.
Sorry, that was me.
He thinks in utilitarian categories, but basically, I think that this is an exciting person, and the fact that his prose was so clear, so crisp, even, is an invitation for all of us to read Kaplan. So let me end when showing you all three of them, right? Buber at the top, Soloveitchik in the middle, Kaplan at the bottom. Look how much they share. They're basically all doing more or less the same thing. They're all authors, they're all philosophers, they're theologians, they're public intellectuals, institution builders. They're doing very, very similar things, but of course, they are quite different from each other. And the last thing is, so why bother with Jewish philosophy? Why should we study it? Why should we spend time on it? Most people don't read philosophy, right? I'm not naive. I read it, but I'm very aware that people don't read it. So my suggestion to you, to all of us here in the room and to people also online, that familiarity with Jewish philosophy really enriches our own understanding of ourselves as Jews, as members of the community, as people who have enormously rich and complex tradition to learn from. So if we listen to the Jewish philosophers, as I try to make them a little bit accessible to you, you will see how much it really helped us to think of ourselves as Jews. So Jewish philosophy, the second line, invites us to think about our beliefs, our values, our action. You don't have to agree with the philosopher, but you have to use the insight of the philosopher to say, okay, well, what does it mean to me? Does it resonate with me? What can I learn from it? How can I read Soloveitchik or Buber or Kaplan and enrich my own thinking about who I am as a Jew? Because it's a big decision. When we say we want to be Jewish, we make a decision, we make a commitment. So what does it mean to us? If you are philosophically oriented, then begin to think in a non-dogmatic way. Philosophers always critique. They raise questions, they ponder, they speculate, they theorize. It's an invitation. They have no power over us. The philosopher doesn't have any power over anybody, but they can invite us to be Jewish in a particular way, in a deeper way. And I think that's really the power of Jewish philosophy. And they invite us to think, why be Jewish, how to be Jewish, why remain Jewish, but it's all about meaning. That's really what philosophy does. It's important to keep in mind that there's no such one Jewish philosophy, only one school of thought. No, Jewish philosophy is very pluralistic. A lot of thinkers say different things and argue with each other. It's very rich. I invite you to get to know more. I give you names of some famous Jewish philosophers from the 20th century. Each one of them deserves to be taught and to be studied in greater depth. They are wonderful thinkers. Most of them, not all, are from German Jewry, but not everybody is. Some are from Poland. But basically, 20th century Jewish thought is wonderful. It's rich and it's deep and it's worth time. It's worthy of your time and your interest. And if you're interested in some Israeli scholarship, there's a lot of philosophy also in Israel in the 20th century, of course, today as well. I have some names on the slide. So basically, this is it for us. And thank you very much for being here for 3 times. Yes.
Okay, Hava. The first question I just want to start us off with is, of the 3 philosophers that we've talked about over the course of the last 3 weeks, which one do you think has the strongest influence on where American liberal Judaism is today?
So we can take Soloveitchik out of the picture,
Yep.
the way you posed the question, right? But I would say Kaplan is definitely where most American Jews are. Most. That doesn't mean everybody. Orthodox is roughly 10, 12%. So clearly Orthodox are not going to say that, Orthodox Jews. In terms of knowledge of Buber is very well known, but Buber also influenced, as I told you in the first lecture, influenced not just American Jewry, but rather American intellectual life. So non-Jews are even more influenced, especially Christians. Christian theologians are more influenced by Buber even than Jews. So Kaplan is it in many ways. Kaplan is the person that where most American Jews really are, in one way or another, a variation thereof. Yes.
Who's next?
Yeah,
Who? Right.
Novakov, yeah.
Right up.
What's that? Yeah. How does the conservative movement today look at someone like Kaplan?
Good question. How do you think? So, Kaplan, the conservative movement, again, I cannot speak for the conservative movement. I'm not an insider enough to answer. So Kaplan clearly represents a strand within conservative Judaism. Let's call it the rationalist, philosophically oriented strand. That's not the end of the story in conservative Judaism today. Conservative Judaism, actually, a good friend of mine who teaches at JTS focuses on Jewish mysticism. So Kabbalah is big in the conservative movement in terms of the history of Kabbalah, knowledge of Kabbalah, care about Kabbalah. It's not just Kabbalah, it's Kabbalah and the Jewish mystical tradition. Kaplan was not in that vein. He was not interested in Kabbalah. He was not interested in Hasidism. So that, I don't know how you want to call it, but I wouldn't call it a conflict, but there's definitely at least duality here. of the rationalist versus the non-rationalist, the more emotional, the more mystical, the more emotive, if you wish. Those aspects are both in conservative Judaism, and you have to choose which one speaks to you most. But I can tell you that in the 50s, in the 40s and the 50s, Kaplan was it. Things begin to change in the late 60s and through the 70s and the 80s. Okay, so I think that they live with both. It's not one or the other. You can be both.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else in the room? There's some online, so. No?
So
All right, let me
does
do
it
the,
make sense to you? Does Kaplan make sense? Yes. I'm telling you, if you read the prose is so well written. It's amazing, really, how accessible he is. There's no excess vocabulary. He speaks very kind of crisply. I guess that's the best word I can come up with. Yes, question.
so, yeah, we have a question online. What was Spinoza's view of ancient Israelites versus Kaplan's? So biblical Judaism, pre-rabbinic.
So hold on, how did Kaplan relate to it?
Yeah, what did he say about it?
So, okay, so Kaplan accepted biblical criticism. Okay, so he looked at ancient Israelites as people that are part of the story of the Jewish civilization. They create this Jewish civilization, but they are not the end of the Jewish civilization. So you have to know the biblical text. You have to look at the biblical text historically. And we have excellent biblical scholarship in the last 250 years, right? So Kaplan was very familiar with biblical scholarship. A lot of Orthodox Jews will take issue with him on biblical scholarship, will not accept what he was willing to accept. But he definitely thinks that we have roots, ancient roots, but that doesn't mean that I have to worry today about what Jeremiah said or Isaiah said, unless I listen to what they had to say and I say, oh, they're about justice, they're about peace, they're about equality. So that's good. But, you know, he clearly has the past, has a vote, but not a veto. It's a perfect slogan.
Yeah.
I need to know about Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos and everybody else. I need to know the history. But it doesn't mean that what I do in the 21st century is identical to what was done in centuries past.
And Spinoza, where would he have been in that same
So he's
discussion?
very much in alignment with Spinoza. So Spinoza for him, as you saw, very few people will talk in the middle of the 20th century, speak about Spinoza as he did, very few. In Israel, yes. You know, Ben-Gurion actually lifted the ban on Spinoza. So for Zionists, yes, Spinoza is a very important thinker. For Kaplan too. He basically does not regard Spinoza as a heretic. He does not regard Spinoza as a non-Jew. Spinoza is a Jew, and we need to know about Spinoza because our view of God is not so different, according to Kaplan, from Spinoza.
Did the people teaching at JTS along with him have the same thoughts about Spinoza, or was
no.
he?
No,
Okay.
it depends. It depends who you ask, who you have in mind. But a lot of
Absolutely.
people found Kaplan too radical. Absolutely, he was not, and he was not just contentious personality. He was a fighter. And if you read especially the person whom he really couldn't get along with was his own boss. The head of the seminary at the time was Cyrus Adler. And they were not on the same page on anything. Biblical scholarship to Zionism, you name it, they are on two opposing sides. So for a while, Kaplan actually was in communication with Stephen Wise to leave JTS and go to Hebrew College, Jewish Institute of Religion, as it was called at the time. And Kaplan actually accepted the job. Took him forever to make a decision, but finally accepted the job. And then when the students learned about it, they raised a lot of, basically, they raised hell about it. And he reneged and he stayed at the seminary.
And that was in the 60s or the 50s?
That was even later. When I don't have the exact time, so I don't want
Well, he
exact
was
year.
sick by the 70s, so.
Yeah, correct. But so I don't have the time exactly. I would say it was in the early 60s, but I could be wrong, could be off by a few years. So we can probably find the answer right here. I have all the resources here with me. So that's it. He was really challenging. And you remember there's in American Jewry, if we had another session, I would have made another lecture on Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Zalman Schachter Shalomi and the Jewish renewal movement is basically the emotional, mystical strands that already existed in conservative Judaism, but it's going to become a separate movement, namely Jewish renewal movement. So this is all, this is all the richness of American Judaism. We have a lot of good stuff. And people, it really pains me as an educator to think that people don't take advantage of the greatness of their writings, the depth, the originality, the audacity even that these people had when they wrote about Judaism in the 20th century. So I invite you to read some of the books on the slides that you can access, and you'll see how whetful really it is that we have such great Jewish thinkers here in America. All right, so I hope I whet your appetite. Take care and have a wonderful, what is it, weekend? No, we have a few days before we get to the weekend. It's still only Wednesday. So thanks for coming. Thank you.